Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things Cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka UberBear, and today I'm joined by my other amazing host.
Hey, it's Stu, and I'm back from vacation, and it feels like I haven't done anything Uber podcast, Cube, shenanigans, magic related in some time, so it's good to be back.
Don't worry, we held down the fort while you're off just gallivanting out on the beach, and a lot has happened since you've been gone.
So I see.
I contracted poison ivy.
So I also see, as we're sitting here, Anthony's looking pretty grotty at the moment. I don't wish that upon my worst enemy. It does not look fun.
I have went through about at least four tubes of various creams trying to kill this stuff. So that's actually my weekend project once we're done recording is kill all the poison ivy.
You have my sympathies.
Oh, yeah, we're doing it. But we're not here to talk about poison ivy today. We're here to talk about the Femme Cube, but from the Planeswalkers and their particular choices that I've made in order to exemplify their roles within the cube, specifically based on the conversation that we had with Emma and May.
So that was one of our most complicated, challenging subject matters, I would say, that we've taken on the podcast over the last 2 years plus that we've been recording. This is a difficult cube, I think, because it's Anthony trying to go outside of just representing an idea or a theme or something, right? You're trying to do a little bit more with that, try and broaden the inclusivity and broaden the horizons of yourself as a cube curator. Definitely, you could argue it's maybe the most important cube that I think that you've put together in all of your years as a cube curator. And I would say, in my personal experience, it's my most favorite. To me, this plays so much fun, and I love the vintage cube, and I love the artifact cube, but I love the Femme Cube. It's just something about how it plays. And to me, this is a great success story for you as a cube curator.
So based on the feedback that we received from both May, from their perspectives, and Emma, what we tried to do is bolster, I guess, the volume of Planeswalkers that have the personas that match what the players are seeking, how they can see themselves as they play it. So that's going to kind of be the theme of this. So, bear with us as Stu and I talk about this, because we're going to be talking a lot of mechanical aspects, but simultaneously the thought has went into it. What is the role when the person sits down to play? How do they feel? And does this capture that type of heroine that they want to personify while drafting this cube?
I think that's an important thing to state very early on, is there is this kind of RPG, playing a role, seeing yourself as more than just someone that's sitting at a table, holding a pack of cards, holding a deck, holding a pack, holding your hand. It's about seeing yourself represented. It's about seeing the player base, seeing a portion of the player base represented, and it's about inclusion and safe and support. And I think that is so critical to the construction of this cube, but also having this understanding as a curator that you have to try and put these Planeswalkers, which is a very divisory, if you will, card type. Love them or hate them, they're in there. They're Magic the Gathering cards. How do they fit into the cube? How can you make them fun? How can you make them not broken, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do with a lot of permanent types, but I feel like Planeswalkers are one of the most challenging. And just how does it fit in the vibe of the cube overall?
All right, so before we talk about this any further, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube. We're going to enjoy our libations of the show. And we're going to start out with Stu. What are you having?
I have got myself, it's a Voodoo Ranger New Belgium IPA. It's a favorite of mine. I'm still thinking that maybe Guinness just never worked out for an endorsement or for any kind of sponsorship. I don't know if New Belgium are ever going to, watch the podcast, listen to the podcast and figure out that, maybe this is a good avenue of advertising for them. But that's what I'm drinking and I love it. Anthony, what you got?
I'm going with a high-pitch Mosaic IPA. It's an IPA that's dry hop, so I really like that a lot. And it's actually flavored with both Mosaic and Centennial hops in it. And it is from Highwire, located out of Asheville, North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken.
And we just had one of these in the pregame, and it was very good.
Smooth. They got it down. Let's crank them open and get to the topic.
All right, first of all, let's do our little promos that we like to do at the start of the episode. Right now, we are in, again, this is August 2024, and we want to give a huge shout out and just try and get as many people to sign up for Cube for a Cause, SS24. This is on Saturday, August 24th. 2024 from 10 a.m. until 3 p.m. This is a twice a year 64-player for charity event. It's in Brooklyn, New York. All profits will be donated to UNRWA. This is an aid organization supporting Palestinian refugees. And further details about this event and where all this money is going can be found at www.upkeepnewyork.com. Tickets are $65. Seems like a pretty good deal to me.
For an amazing cause.
Yeah, for a great Cube event.
I have been communicating with Scott, and I know that they're looking for additional players. And by the time this episode comes out, it's going to be really tight to the wire. But if you're looking for an amazing person, Scott Mertz,
incredible,
who has the Curio Cube that's going to be featured at CubeCon 2024.
Yep.
There's no other better place to be.
No,
so
I
if
agree.
you're looking for these little small events, we told you before, 2024 is the year of the Cube.
It is.
Highly recommend it. We're going to crescendo into the big CubeCon event here in October. But it's just a great thing that Scott's doing and Upkeep New York is doing. So shout out to them.
Yep, huge shout out.
So let's kind of talk about, I know you've been on vacation. You've been walking around just finding sand dollars and fiddler crabs.
That's
but
correct.
I have been occasionally playing the Magics while you've been away. I'm missing Stu, but I'm going to play some Magic. So
good.
Here's a couple of things. I'll do a little recap of my week in Magic, just super fast. We did some Winston drafts. The other day, myself and Chris, we drafted his Peasant Cube and went through some durations of that. And what we determined is that Chris finally came to the revelation that Gut is too powerful for a Peasant Cube.
Really?
I know.
That happened much quicker than I thought it was going to be honest. Because I know that that's a card that he's a fan of. I know that's a card that he thought was kind of give some game to that aggro portion of the cube that he was, I don't know, necessarily trying to push it, but just thought would be an interesting aspect to the cube. But I do know that it had been on the watch list. A lot of us had said, look, this is something that's powerful even in a vintage cube, and it's not like there's no support for it or limited support for it in that cube. So interesting choice, probably the right one. But yeah, surprised that it came so quickly, but good job.
Yeah, I got to play a little Rakdos package, and he got to see how you just mobilized the 4/1 skeletons coming in sideways with Menace.
Yeah.
Our beloved Gut episode that we talked about. Which was interesting, and he was one of the holdouts, and I still see a lot of Peasant Cube curators that still run Gut, and it's mostly if you get Gut out early, and there's no, what we observed is if there was no board presence, no way to stymie back the 4/1s, it was just a game-winning card. So that was a interesting little thing we learned during the week. Then, after he left and we recorded an episode, Christian came over. And then we just nonsensically did a Winston draft on my powered vintage cube. And the reason why I'm mentioning this, you'll adore this. I drafted the most nonsensical 5-color Golo spin that wheel deck with Urza.
You'll love to see it.
For the full intent of just spinning the wheels. That's all I did. It was borderline obnoxious. Lost miserably.
But how many times did you get to spin to win?
I dropped a few bombs on the board. Christian still took over that pretty haphazardly. He didn't have to try too hard. But you know what? I had the most fun just doing... I really thought of you a lot when I Wooburged out, and I just spun that wheel on Gula. Was it Wooburg +2, right?
Yes.
And I did that thing, and I just flopped over, and it hit nothing. It was fantastic.
Sometimes just the journey is more important than the destination, you know? And that's sometimes
I think I took
what
him
that
on
deck
game
is
3
about.
for the bonus match.
Oh,
the
there
mercy,
you go.
I won the mercy matches.
That's all you can ask for sometimes.
But that's pretty much our week in Cube. It was just that's what I got to do with my friends, hang out. We did a little bit. And one of the things that Christian loves to shout out loud that I adore is like, week in Winston draft. I think he got that from Loaded Ready Run.
Yeah, yep.
And he just yells that every time. So yeah, great time. But I'm glad you had a great time at the beach.
I love that. Thank you. I do say that obviously Luis Scott Vargas at Old LSV has been putting up more content for Winston drafts. Maybe we're going to see 2024 as the year of Cube, and now we're going to see years of these extra little things. And maybe this 2025 is going to be the year of the Winston draft, amongst other things, when it comes to Cube. But I really do love Winston draft because it's a great way to just say, hey, we've only got 2 people. Let's just grab and make a bunch of packs, throw them up, do a quick draft, play a best of 3 real quick. You don't need some huge setup. You don't need even 8 players or 6 players. You can just bang it out with a couple of players. So maybe there's some popularity there that's going to expand on.
Well, since we're on the topic and people are like scratching their heads going, what's a Winston draft? Has nothing to do with our conversation we're having today. But basically you take 90 cards from your cube and then you make 3 piles and then you take one from the first pile. If you don't like it, you put one from the top of the deck on that and it continues to make stacks. And then eventually you take a stack of cards.
3 packs, 1 card on each to start. If you take the first pack, it just gets a card replaced and then it goes to the next player. If you choose not to, you put a card on top of that stack and then go to the next stack. If you choose that one, you take it and then that card is replaced. And then so you can see how you could either take 1 card that might be incredible, but then you can get these stacks that can build up. And sometimes it's a great choice between, do I take this 1 card that's like could be good, but there's like 7 cards there and they might be amazing, you know, by the time the end of the draft comes around.
You basically end up in
very cool
color nonsense.
Yeah, exactly. Take your fetch lands.
All right, so we're not here to talk about Winston drafts. We're not talking about any of that.
Let's talk about Planeswalkers.
I wanted to kind of get you into our week of the cube kind of thing and talk about that a little bit.
It's been a while, so I appreciate that.
Let's start out with the Femme Cube that's featured at CubeCon 2024. And I would like to just go ahead and give a shout out to the Birds of Paradise Bop, who selected my cube. And one of the things that I kind of informally announced that I'll announce now, the only card that I'll have in there is not a woman. That's the idea of the design of this is, to be determined. But the idea is I wanted to just celebrate them. And I put a Birds of Paradise in there with the original Mark Poole art in there. I wanted that to just as an homage to say thank you. I am so honored that this group actually supported such
I think that's fantastic. I think, again, you're not making this inclusion in the cube as a direct reference of the card itself, the creature itself, whatever the case may be. It's just, here's a really cool group of people that are obviously very passionate about Magic. I would assume they're pretty passionate about inclusion and that are very passionate about any cube that promotes diversity. And this just is a great homage to them. I couldn't agree more. I think it's fantastic.
So when you're cracking packs, this is my thank you. That's what I'm offering here. Thank you for selecting my cube to be featured.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate everything you do and support the community. And let's do some little bit of topical. We got some notes this time around. You know, last time Stu and I talked, it was loosey-goosey. We had a good time. But
this is a Planeswalker-centric episode.
It is.
And it's not our first Planeswalker-centric episode. We did do a Super Friends episode way, way, way back when. And we kind of discussed the Lorwyn 5, right? The OG Planeswalkers from way, way back. And then we talked about how you either should or should not, right? Because there's a lot of decisions that should be made when it comes to including Planeswalkers in a cube. They have the ability to be great support pieces. They also have the ability to just completely ruin / take over a game and make things unfun, especially if they are chase pieces. And certainly I can say that I have, and I know that you have experienced this in other cubes, where the Planeswalkers just stick out so much as power outliers that all of a sudden it just becomes, if you are able to draft a Planeswalker or a couple of Planeswalkers, especially if the numbers are limited, then all of a sudden it becomes the game piece that you're just looking for every time, because you know that if you land it, you win the game.
So what I've done with this cube is I've taken that kind of Super Friends mold, if you will, but now I'm directing it towards the Femme Cube. So I'm looking for women in Magic that are, again, that kind of fill those roles and those personas that the players are looking for. And that's kind of my driver in here, because May and Emma both talked about it. When they sit down at the table, they want to be seen, right? Their ideal situation is they sit down with other women. And I wanted to foster an environment that really helps to kind of build that idea up. And the best way I saw doing it is taking some of the Planeswalkers, and some of them are from, the Gatewatch, but there's other ones that are more popular. But I thought just using the idea of the Nissas and the Chandras and the Lilianas, it would allow the players to latch onto the idea. And then I offered support pieces to build around that, following the theme of the Chandras, the Lilianas, Vivians, etc. Right?
Kaya.
Yeah. So Kaya, right? So I wanted to do a lot of that. And that, Stu and I actually did a little pre-gaming, and he was asking me if there's any new Planeswalkers that have come out recently. And now we're post Modern Horizons 3 and Bloomburrow.
Bloomburrow is the latest,
and there was nothing that changed the actual equation for me in this cube to provide more pieces in terms of Planeswalkers. But I wanted to ask Stu about the impact of Planeswalkers from a cube design standpoint. And I think you kind of summarized that in so many words. We're going to go strictly mechanical here now.
Right. So obviously this is a little unique from a cube perspective because you want them as characters to be representative. Okay, so now you have, and again, you mentioned you've got those original Lorwyn Planeswalkers, but then you do have a number of other options, certainly from many sets over the last few years, where you've been able to spread things out, so to speak, right? So you're not just limited to even single color, now you've got multicolor and all different kinds of Planeswalkers that do all kinds of different fun and powerful things, right? So one of the things that is obviously always the challenge with a Planeswalker, with a cube like this, is fitting the identity of the Planeswalkers within the archetype, right? I'm gonna hazard a guess, right? And you tell me that these aren't designed to just be value level Planeswalkers within the scope of this cube. Is that an accurate statement?
That's an accurate statement. I had to find ones that played to the power bands of this environment. And the epiphany came to me during our recent episode with Chris. This is, in my opinion, my cube that is closest to a peasant environment. Where
Peasant Plus.
Yeah, Peasant Plus, we'll call that, where I support aristocrats and Blink and a lot of those effects. But it actually does kind of water down the power levels a little bit. So I have to be really careful with power bands. Mm-hmm. Even when I'm choosing, say, for example, like Liliana the Veil felt a little too aggressive, assertive, too forward for me, even though it's an iconic card and I have the modern art that's tasteful. Mm-hmm. It meant that I had to support like this entire stacks type of package, like with their braids, etc. And those packages didn't really work out with the token themes and all that, but I'm going side topic there. But it's interesting when I'm looking at power bands, when a recent card came out like the Wandering Emperor, and these will all be included in the show notes because Planeswalkers, as you all know, are going to be very lengthy. The Wandering Emperor, both the 4-drop and the 6-drop version of them are both in my power cube. And these are extremely powerful Magic cards. And then there's one that's actually a Wandering Emperor or the Emperor or whatever. The Wanderer, I think it was. That was kind of from the War of the Spark. That was a not so great Magic card. There's 3 iterations of it, but the last 2 have been busted. They felt so strong. They had that flash ability. They made samurais. They did all these things, right? That's what I have to be careful with is I'm trying to maintain the thematic or the personas, but simultaneously, I don't want these cards to overtake the environment. I want them to have more of a mid-range representation for players, right? Something to curve out by 4, 5, 6 that feels like you can start, getting a hold of this game from a mechanical standpoint. Mm-hmm. But they also represent characters that people can latch on to.
I actually think that Liliana of the Veil is a great case study in exactly what you're talking about, right? So many years ago, Liliana was a staple in Modern, has been considered one of the most powerful Planeswalkers to have been printed for a long time, was, I would argue, a cube/constructed deck staple, right, across multiple formats, but has lost the luster over the years, right? More powerful things to do have been printed, not necessarily Planeswalkers, but just more powerful things to do in that 2 and 3 mana slots. There's a danger, I think, to curators in general, and this is not just a Planeswalker-specific thing, but definitely to look at these Planeswalkers and think, or look at any card type or any card even and think, that card isn't as powerful as it used to be, so maybe there's a safety net now because of how the game has sped up. Liliana is a 3 mana. You absolutely must deal with this card or it's probably going to win you the game. And that is a rare thing. Generally in Magic, I still want to say that, even though we've seen so much power increased in that 2 and 3 mana slot over the last few years, but it's still a limitation, right, in the grand sphere of Magic in general, and especially when you're talking about Cube and you've got 30 years of Magic cards to be able to choose from. But Liliana is so representative. It's so iconic. It's a card that so many, and I can imagine, like, my kids, right? I've got daughters. They look at cards like the Lilianas, and they look at those cards when I've got them in commander decks or I've just got them lying around on my table, and they're like, wow, she is so cool looking, right? So they're looking at that thinking, man, what a cool card. I would love to play with a card like that. And yet now there's that balancing act that you've got to say, like, yeah, I would love to just throw those cards in, but do I really just want to put in a 3-mana, I must deal with this card, or it's going to end the game? Like, how complicated is that as a curator?
Well, I want to double back for a second with the Wandering Emperor, where I said it had all these unique abilities that really made it hyper-aggressive.
Let's talk about Flash. Let's start with the Flash ability.
It's the Flash ability, right?
Right?
And we're going to come back to this, but it was a card that I had to cut over time just because I was threatening the power bands from strictly a mechanical standpoint. While I do love the art and I love what it represents, it's just the card, as you mentioned, was so standalone, had to be answered. It would take over games. It was an engine in a bottle. Had to deal with it. That I actually transitioned over to the Elspeths, going back to the character that you could latch on to. It's a very known quantity, right, in the community. And I wanted the players to have something that was fun factored and power balanced. So I have to look at these from two different directions. Going back to Liliana the Veil versus the Last Hope. Liliana the Veil's out. And I looked at it over and over again, but it required like an entire archetype stacks. And it felt like it would be directly attacking, in this environment exclusively, the fun factor of the environment versus I can do Last Hope. And it does all the mechanical aspects, still provides the character persona that I want people to latch onto with all the cards that support the idea of Liliana, but not taking away from the fun. So it's like this weird little scales that I'm always balancing when I'm thinking about this.
Yeah, and let's be clear, Liliana Hope is a very, very powerful Planeswalker. I think you could maybe argue, cube dependent, that they're kind of adjacent in some ways because you've got that sack ability on Liliana of the Veil, but then Liliana of the Last Hope has that decrease the toughness and power of a creature. So in a very creature-heavy cube, absolutely, that can be very, very close as far as power level is concerned. Is it necessarily going to take over the game as quickly that Liliana of the Veil does? Maybe not. Maybe could you argue it's a little bit more flexible because you've got that hand stripping capability built into it? That is the thing that's going to push it over the edge.
That's what tied into the fun, right? I still do limited hand stripping, but it has to follow the mold of what I'm talking about, where it has to be a woman. But also don't want it to overtake the game. So I've got this weird little balancing act.
If Liliana of the Veil was 5 mana, would you be more
absolutely. Absolutely. It's the 3 mana that threatens. It's the early game, get it out, and then each player discards a card.
Yeah, deal with it or die.
One person really likes it because they're playing in a reanimator, the other person's miserable. So I have to kind of try to take these into my factors when I'm looking at these cards. And we've talked about this a lot of times. Planeswalkers represent the idea of an active fog. If they're too strong, and what I mean by that, they're too strong, it causes the rivers to diverge. So normally when you would be directly attacking Two-Face, the player, you're now diverting all of your resources, or some of your resources, to ensure the Okos and the Jaces and all this don't continue to tick up and do what they're doing because you feel like there's a timer on you, right? So when I'm choosing these Planeswalkers, I'm not looking at it from the character persona, I'm also looking at it from the mechanical attributes of said card.
I love that you brought Oko up because that's, I think, the point that we made, or that I made in our previous episode about Planeswalkers, where I said I put this in a commander deck, and that's what Oko is. It's a 3-mana fog, because I know guaranteed if that Planeswalker is on the battlefield, not a single creature is going to attack, not just me, but almost any other player that's playing that game, right? Every single creature is going to head at Oko because they know how powerful that card is. Even though I actually think Oko is fairly reasonable, and I think Oko, as strong a card that it is, has kind of been overtaken quite a lot in a lot of other, powerful cards. But it just does have that role, have that vibe about it.
Kind of my requirements that I'm looking at is if it fits the vibe, the persona that I'm looking for, right? Secondly, it has the ability to protect itself in some way, and then it represents some form of midrange strategy is what I'm really looking for, right? So I want cards that don't self-include their own engines, going back to the Emperor, the Wandering Emperor, where it just kind of did something so detrimental to your game state that no matter what you did, you had to divert all your resources. You could not ignore this. Liliana the Veil actually kind of fell underneath that too, because from the hand stripping standpoint, maybe the Boros aggro player wasn't prepped to keep losing all of their hand, whereas the reanimator player that's drafted this card is having a wonderful time.
Oh, they're very happy to just keep dumping cards in the graveyard.
Balancing act. And as I think about this from all sides of this equation, this is what I'm doing.
So let's talk about those choices, right? So this is, let's be very transparent. This script that we're working off right now is an older one, right? Put together a few weeks ago. But it's incredible how relevant all of these Planeswalkers still are. Like you said, you've looked through Bloomburrow, you've looked through some of the recent sets. There hasn't been this collection of Planeswalkers that's all of a sudden shaken up this cube, right? When it comes to the additions that you've decided to make. And a lot of these Planeswalkers, they just kind of fit the vibe of the cube in general. There's something natural about it.
I would agree with that 100%. We're talking about the Wanderer, and I decided to step it back and go back towards Elspeth as the main character. Because Elspeth wasn't really represented in this cube. Because it was a Planeswalker, what did it die in, I want to say...
War of the Spark?
World of the Spark?
Was it War of the Spark?
No, she was resurrected. I can't remember what was that set. Doesn't matter.
Anyway, I'm not a lore person.
Yeah, I'm not a lore person
either.
either. But what I wanted to actually get out of this is bring back a character that fit back with that Lorwyn 5 type idea, had familiarity, a persona, strong cards, a little bit like dialed down from my power levels in my powered vintage cube, but then represented like a really nice power band. And I will include all of these in the show notes. Planeswalkers, again, to reiterate, are lengthy. And we're not going to read all these. I'm going to give you the names. But Elspeth Sun's Nemesis is the one I decided to go with. And the gist of that card is it has the ability to escape. So this is a card that can make you the 1/1 white human soldiers.
2/1. 2/1. Well, I'm sorry, yes. Creates the 1/1s.
2/1/1 human white soldiers. And it allows you to gain 5 life, and it also buffs your soldiers. And then when you use up all, because all these are negative, you can eventually escape it back. And I just thought this was a neat card because it just kind of, it ticks down entirely. And again, going back to that, it doesn't take over games, doesn't keep buffing up itself. You're incentivized to do the escape. So I thought this was a really cool card. It enriched the environment. And then this next one, you want to tell them about this one? Why I added this one?
I mean, Big Elspeth is just, it's a great card. It's an iconic card. I think just how iconic Elspeth Sun's Champion is, just for me, makes it so worthy of inclusion in a cube like this. So we said we wouldn't do them. Let's just do this one. So Elspeth Sun's Champion, 4 colorless, 2 white, Planeswalker Elspeth, comes in with 4 loyalty. +1 is put 3 1/1 white soldier creature tokens onto the battlefield. -3, destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater. And then -7, you get an emblem with creatures you control, get +2/+2, and have flying. This is... I have a lot of favorite Planeswalkers, or favored Planeswalkers, maybe I should say. This one is up there in my top 5 most personal favorites. I think for the mana value that it's at, I think for the +1 ability being extremely strong, 6 mana is a lot of mana to spend on a Planeswalker, but getting 3 extra permanents into play the turn it comes down is so very relevant. Having a 6 mana and then a -3 board sweeper that still leaves Elspeth on the battlefield is just incredible. And then the ultimate is just any kind of creature-based deck, it's just very difficult to come back from something like that. To me, this is one of the most iconic Planeswalkers of all time, and I think anyone that's enjoyed Magic for any length of time is just going to be familiar with Elspeth Sun's Champion. Again, so very iconic. And I love that Planeswalkers like this, that are just great value, are appropriately costed, can fit into a cube, but not take over at an early stage. I just think there's something so wonderful about it.
To tag off of that, it's kind of like a top end of a control shell.
100%.
That's why I wanted this card from a mechanical standpoint. And then this next one I had, it's interesting. Blue is kind of starved this idea. So we've got Narset, but outside of that, there's not a lot of women in blue, straight up just pure blue, that allow me to express this idea. But this Mu Yang Ling, Sky Dancer, for 1 colorless and 2 blue, you get a 2 loyalty cost Planeswalker. And +2, until your next turn, up to 1 target creature gets -2, -0, and loses flying. So it has kind of a defense mechanism. But what's interesting about this card is it starts out 2 loyalty. That's kind of what I liked about this.
Yep.
It met the pacing requirements that I wanted from a mechanical standpoint. And then
vulnerable.
I want the Planeswalkers to be vulnerable and not like additive distraction, taking away from the gameplay and slowing it down. And then -3 was create a 4/4 blue elemental bird creature token with flying. It's super powerful. So the ability to defend itself actually comes from the -2, and then later you start setting up an engine. So I like the slow build engine of this. And then the -8, you get an emblem with islands you control have tap, draw a card. So
pretty strong.
If you get there, you've already won. We've already moved into super win more status.
Yeah.
But I wanted this because of the pacing. The power bands do matter a lot to me. When I'm doing the mechanical attributes and the personas and the characters and all that, I want to stay within that tight bandwidth of, we called it Peasant Plus, right? And this is edging on that idea.
This is not a common or uncommon.
It's mythic. It's mythic. It's mythic.
Very quickly. But I love, this is a very elegant Planeswalker to me. It comes in, it does have that vulnerability about it, that it only comes in with 2 loyalty. And the +2 is only to just affect one target creature, obviously likely on your opponent's side. But it does have that engine ability to get moving. I think the design on that is wonderful.
The next one we have in here, we already kind of talked about it, was Liliana the Last Hope. And the reason why I have that in here is because it also supports kind of the really light touch of Reanimator that I have in this cube. That's probably the weakest archetype. If you're leaning, it's more of like, I lost my creature, I'm wanting to get it back for a long-term value, but there's no like real Reanimator package in here. There's Reanimate. Now, granted, they did print that, but I'm very light touchy on that idea. I just want it to be like not a focused archetype. I want it to be a micro synergy.
Well, Reanimate can be very scalable, right? We've talked, this is another discussion that we've had at various times throughout the life of our podcast, is the scalability of certain cards. And any kind of Reanimate effect can be very scalable depending on the support that you have for it. Liliana is not a targeted, Entomb as an example. It's just you're milling cards. And then you can bring cards back from your graveyard to your hand. So it's not strictly a Reanimator-esque card, but it does have that really cool +1 that you can protect yourself with. -2 so that you can put something in your graveyard, and any kind of synergies that you've got there can be obviously very powerful. And then the -7, which is you start just churning out zombie creature tokens, that's a game finisher by itself. But again, it exists in that 3 mana slot. So you've got kind of this vulnerability where, all right, it's not a 2 loyalty like a Mu Yanling, but it's only 3, and even the +1 is only impacting 1 creature card on your opponent's side, right? So you do have to sort of think a little bit when you're going to play this. Is it just going to be oh my gosh, I just need to make sure that 1 flyer isn't going to attack me, or, maybe there's this one, probably not Bob, right? I don't know if Dark Confidant really is going to fit in this cube.
No, he will not. He will not.
But, creatures like that can be quite impactful that you can deal with a 3 mana Planeswalker. So it's a great utility card, and just, again, for me, it's just such an elegantly designed Planeswalker.
So we get into the more interesting, so we're pre-gaming talking about, like, my preference in this cube is the rock. I like the green-black. I like the Golgari. And I think Emma actually mentioned that, too, when she was drafting it. Green-black is, in my opinion, and it's probably the most supported from the Planeswalker standpoint, if you want to do that, using these as mid-range top-end creatures. Would you agree with that statement?
I mean, I don't want to, let my secret out, because that's the direction that I generally try to go in. I'm not going to force it every time, but I will say that the most success that I've had with this cube is some element of black. Usually there's green involved. Maybe there's some other color support that I've been able to slot in there. But black green is very, very powerful for sure.
So, which leads us over to this next one, which I'm a big fan of. I think this is from AFR, yeah. I had to think about it. It's got the little dragon. Lotlith, the Spider Queen, for 3 colorless and black. And I'm going to read this because it's not overly familiar to most people. But you get a Planeswalker, Lotlith. Whenever a creature you control dies, put a loyalty counter on Lotlith Spider Queen. 0, you draw a card and lose 1 life. -3, create 2 2/1 black spider creature tokens with menace and reach. And then a -8, you get an emblem whenever an opponent is dealt combat damage by 1 or more creatures you control. If that player lost less than 8 life this turn, they lose life equal to the difference, since 4 mana Planeswalker. I don't care about emblems. I don't design around emblems.
Okay, it's
an okay emblem.
Well, it's all right. It's 5 mana, but that's okay. Lolth has the ability. Number 1, any kind of card draw. Losing a life, it is what it is. Any kind of card draw engine that comes in with 4 loyalty, I'm immediately a fan of. I always feel that there's some mythical meaning behind 3, right? Maybe it's just lightning bolt and being able to deal with something, immediately for 3 damage. But I feel like it coming in with 4, even for 5 mana, and then you get to draw a card, is just strong by itself. But then you get to create 2 creatures. And not only do you get to create two 2/1s, but they have reach. So now you've got this protective aspect that Lolth has. And they have menace, so they attack incredibly well. The -8, I don't really know if I would really care about that too much when I'm playing this card.
I focused on the spiders. And
the spiders is so good.
The spiders kind of hold you down. They keep the fort down.
Do you know what menace is? It's a menace.
It's a menace. yes.
You know what reach is? Really, really good if you're playing any kind of, control-y, dealing with blue or white or whatever. But again, flavor, vibe, theme of the cube, Lolth, Spider Queen, how can you not get excited by looking at a card like this? It's incredible.
It was fantastic. This next one, because we're non-Wooburg here, because whenever I piecemeal these together, I never quite follow that Wooburg path as I should. But
no. Keep doing what you're doing.
I'm so bad at it. But Chandra, the Acolyte Flame, for 1 colorless and 2 red, for a 4 loyalty planeswalker.
Mm-hmm.
When this first came out, I couldn't figure out why people are so excited about it. And this will be included in the show notes. Again, we're going to preserve time here and not read all these. Lengthy as all get out. But the -2 ability, you may cast target instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard. If that card would be put into a graveyard this turn, exile instead, is like a little snapcaster that I've been dreaming of, right? And I couldn't figure out why people are so hype about this card for the zeros that made all the 1/1 elementals, and it does fit an aggro package, but it lets you get those burn spells back.
It sure does.
I didn't really look at this card through that proper lens, and it gave me the Chandras that I was looking to try to get the personas, some of those, the ones people could latch their teeth onto as they played at CubeCon 2024.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, 3 mana for 2 damage from those 2 1/1 red elemental creature tokens. Is it going to be a game changer?
Maybe
not. It's a decent little value play at 3 mana.
It kind of gave me that little bit of, I want to bring some spells back from my graveyard and replay them.
Love that.
And that's what I couldn't figure out quite what people are so hype about this.
And as we've read that, the other 0, so the create 2 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste, that's a 0. The other 0 is put a loyalty counter on each red planeswalker you control. I don't know how much that's come into play super on limited, this I
only have 2 Chandras.
You do.
At current state, it's limited.
It is limited.
But it may grow over time. Who knows, right?
Of course.
And which leads me over to one that kind of I think has diminishing returns over time, which is Chandra the Flamecaller. There was a Wayback Machine here where this card was very prevalent, but for 4 colorless and red for a 4 loyalty planeswalker, it's not cutting the mustard in those high-powered vintage cubes anymore.
It very much is not.
But now, the way I look at this is, I'm going to kind of skip through all these abilities. It has the aggro aspect with making 3/1 elementals. But I looked at this more for, it could protect itself from the X damage it does to each creature, and or discard all the cards in your hand, then draw that many cards +1.
That is such a weird wheel effect. Right? It is such a sweet effect as well. How many times have you thought, man, I would love to just be able to dump all these useless lands or, other creatures that I don't really care about right now, given the board state. I would love to be able to just ditch them all and then draw myself a new grip of potentially burn spells that are going to finish the game or other parts of my high end. This just fills the role like that. It's really cool. Again, it's a 6 mana card. It's expensive. It's not I'm going to pay 3 mana. I'm going to have this immediate, huge impact, like a Liliana of the Veil. But it's just a really cool and fun card. And this is something that I think fits the vibe of this cube so well.
And you said that. It was the leading edge is Persona.
Yes.
It has to fit the requirements.
Yeah.
Secondly, it has to fit the power bands. And then third, it has to be a utility feature that the cube desires, right?
Hey, 2/3/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste. That ain't nothing.
No, there ain't nothing. But at the same time, discarding your whole hand and reloading.
That can also be amazing.
So it gives you options and or sweeping. So it kind of falls kind of like Elspeth did.
Yeah.
The Sun's Champion. So it kind of, costs 6, but you're stabilizing, goes into a control mechanism. I saw it from that perspective, from the curation standpoint. Now we're going to dip into the green section here a little bit with Nissa, another one of the personalities that I wanted to personify here, right? And Nissa, Voice of Zendikar for 1 colorless and green, you get a 3 loyalty planeswalker. Nissa. What I liked about this one is it kind of went into the 1/1 counters themes. It made plants, went to 1/1 counters, etc. And then it always has these older planeswalkers, a little bit older, had that you gain X life, you draw X cards, it kind of win more-ish. But ultimately, the way this card is played is you get a planeswalker out to block the aggro player. Because aggro was a menace for a period.
I'm going to tell you this.
Plants are real.
I'm going to tell you this. The last time I drafted this cube, I was 2-0, and I played Chris Moore, our good friend Sandwich, in the finals. And this card, Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, came out 2 games. It won me the game by itself. I'm just spitting out plants, and whenever I feel like it, whenever I feel like I'm comfortable with the loyalty, I'm down ticking and putting +1/+1. It was certainly a match of attrition, right? Chris is a very, very, very strong deck builder and Magic player. I always feel like I have to be on my A game when I'm playing against him, right?
Versus not me.
Exactly, right? No, of course, I'm just kidding. But this card just won me the game by itself. Just that constant presence that it's putting out there. It was quick to get out. I'm just dumping out plants onto the battlefield. It's not like they're defenders. They eventually will get big enough that they will start taking out your opponent's creatures, and then eventually you can start plowing through damage with them. And the -7, gaining X life and drawing X cards, is definitely a thing that you want to do anytime where you're playing Magic. I love gaining life and drawing cards, but in the case of the games that I play with Nissa, I always feel like just the ability to put creatures out, make them bigger, put creatures out, make them bigger. Incredibly fun card. And it's Nissa. It's green. It's a Planeswalker. It's fun, right? You want to be getting your big creatures out there. This appeals to the Timmy side of me, back in the day that just wanted to put creatures out on the battlefield and turn them sideways. Like, how much fun is that? All right, so the second green Planeswalker we're going to talk about. So I express my love for Nissa, Voice of Zendikar. We didn't say that we were going to go through all of these, but I'm going to go through these 2 just because my personal experience is these are absolute game-changing, game-winning Planeswalkers, 100%. So this one is Vivien, Monsters, Advocate, 3 colors and 2 green, legendary Planeswalker, Vivien, comes in with 3 loyalty, has 2 static abilities. You may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may also cast creature spells from the top of your library.
A weird creature feature site. In green.
Unbelievable.
Yep.
Number 1, +1. Create a 3/3 green beast creature token. Put your choice of a vigilance counter, a reach counter, or a trample counter on it for the +1.
Full disclosure, I don't have any of those counters.
They're not necessary.
Yep.
I've already won by the time that I'm worrying about the counters. And the -2, whenever you cast your next creature spell this turn, right, after you activate the -2, search your library for a creature card with lesser converted mana cost, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. I always felt that -2 was a little bit on the bonkers side for a thematic / fun, non-power driven cube, right? Because I play my Vivien, turn 5, right? Turn 5, okay, I'll +1. Now it's 4. I've also got a 3/3 green beast protector. But then I get to play a 6 mana creature, -2, and then put a 5 mana creature out. And that's not from my hand. That's from my library.
Yep. We have
card,
discussed this is the most on the watch list forever.
It is the most powerful Planeswalker in this cube, in my opinion, and it's not even close. I mentioned the game that I played against Chris, and Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, was the absolute all-star in that game. The other 2 matches that I played with the deck that I'm referring to, Vivien single-handedly won. I think one of the games was against you, and one of the games was against, I think the other game was against Christian or one of our other play group. But the card's just bonkers.
And I'm willing to accept that because you have now paid 5 mana. So this is the top end of that mid-range moving into the WinCon type level. So I'm okay with DEFCON 5 here on this idea. That's ultimately what it came down to. I looked at this card a lot. I watch list it. And I just feel strongly that you've earned it at this point. You start taking over games. People aren't attacking it. This is a high threat level. But they paid 5 for a 3 loyalty Planeswalker. So it is vulnerable. Because you can only tick up by 1s.
You can, and I think the static ability, so obviously looking at the top card of your library, okay, that's fine. You may cast creature spells from the top of your library.
I think that's the most powerful aspect
that
of
is,
this card.
it's very, very, very powerful, because obviously that -2 ability also doesn't care. It doesn't say when you cast your next creature spell from your hand, right? So if you cast that creature spell from the top of your library and then -2, now you've got that, that extra bit of value that you've added onto it. So again, to me, Golgari or any kind of green X is the way to win in this cube, and that is just such a huge power. I don't want to say necessarily an outlier, but it's definitely very strong.
The next one I actually wanted to put in here too is Kaya the Ghost Assassin for 2 colorless and Orzhov. You get a Kaya Planeswalker. And, again, we said we weren't going to read these, but some of these are a little different than what people are used to. I think this was originally from Conspiracy, if I'm not mistaken. But for 0, you get Exile Kaya, Ghost Assassin, or up to 1 target creature. Return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. At the beginning of your next upkeep, you lose 2 life. So it kind of gives me that little bit of reach into my Azorius Blink package, but now lets it go into the Esper Blink package, if you will. Right?
Yeah, you've got that 3rd color.
And then -1 is each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life, which plays into my synergies that I have with Aristocrat. So I've got some cross-pollination that I did with this card. And then -2, each opponent discards a card, and you draw a card for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker. So it did a lot of the things that I wanted to do. Value Engine, Blink package, Aristocrats, protects itself through some strange kind of removing itself, resetting its loyalty. Huge fan of this card. Lower powered cubes can really kind of develop from this, in my opinion. And it, as I mentioned, it played into a lot of different archetypes. So I'm looking at this strictly from a mechanical standpoint, but then the representation with Kaya is something that I really wanted to have. So I have other cards to do that too. It was important to me as a person.
I think this one, so again, this is a Planeswalker that does not have a plus ability. It's a 0, a -1, and a -2. So this has got a limited lifespan when it's on the battlefield, right? But it's such a pressure card. It's so much pressure. The exiling and the blink effect is a very, very strong ability for Kaya, because obviously if you blink Kaya, she comes back with 5 loyalty, right? So even though you don't have that plus, you still have that ability to reset her back to 5 loyalty. You do have to obviously take a turn off of her other abilities, but now you get those 5 loyalty points back. But draining an opponent for 2 and gaining 2, that is a very relevant ability in what, again, we're kind of going to call this peasant plus power level of this Femme Cube. And each opponent discarding a card and you drawing a card for -2, that still only puts her at 3 loyalty, right? Only? Well, all right. Now she's susceptible to a lightning bolt.
So from the math standpoint, it's a delta 4.
Yeah.
This is not irrelevant.
It's extremely relevant.
Right? So that's kind of what I'm looking for. So it's control-y. It plays into an Esper package. That's what I was looking for. I'm limited based on theme and the requirements of this cube, right?
Yes.
Stu and I pregame talk about this.
Correct.
Wanted to know if there's any new things that I could add, but if it isn't broke, I'm not going to fix it either. I'm going to do some tuning prior to, I guess Dustborn might give me a few cards.
Dustborn might do it.
Maybe.
Well, it's interesting.
We don't know yet.
Well, we looked at the list, and then I think this is a good break for this particular conversation. We actually looked through the list, and I was looking at Rakdos. I was like, oh, you don't have any Rakdos Planeswalkers in there, right? And I'm not even looking at the theme of the cube. I'm just looking at what options do you have in a Femme Cube for a Planeswalker, and there's nothing.
It doesn't exist yet.
Nothing at all. There's no black-red specific. There are your mono-red, so you've got Chandra, you've got Jaya, Jaya Ballard. So there are options in the mono-red. There are options in the mono-black. You have them in this cube already, but nothing specific for black and red. So I don't want to say that you're necessarily pigeonholed in, okay, I have to make these choices because I want representation, either because I need them for this archetype or I just want to include them in the cube. But it really does highlight for me the challenge that you've had to overcome with this cube, right? Is trying to fit thematically Planeswalkers that can exist in this cube and not be overpowered, can complement the archetypes that they want, that they exist within, and also just be fun at the same time.
Yeah, it's a balancing act, which leads me into Saheeli, the Sublime Artificer. for 1 colorless, and we got a
Hybrid blue, red, blue, red.
Yeah, hybrid blue red. You get a Saheeli, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token for a 5 loyalty planeswalker. That's generally what actually is used in here. It supports the Spells Matters theme. If I had to just like distill this down. When I look at these, I generally don't look at Kaya's an exception to the rule, where it's got multiple of its loyalty abilities that apply to lots of archetypes.
Right.
Whereas Saheeli just kind of just says cast non-creature spells, so it screams prowess, etc.
It does. One of the great things about Saheeli is that the -2 ability, it doesn't have to be relevant in a cube. Can it be relevant? It can be very relevant in, for example, the vintage cube, where you can just spit out artifacts and then have them become a copy of one of the absurdly powerful artifacts that exists in that cube. But Saheeli doesn't have to do anything after you cast her, right? She can just sit there and then spit out these 1/1 colorless servos when you're casting all of your non-creature spells. And that is such a great on-theme ability for a blue-red deck, right? Because you want to be drawing cards, and you maybe want to be burning things, and maybe casting some counter spells, and you're getting this residual value every time you're casting one of those cards. And it's 5 loyalty is not to be scoffed at, right? That's pretty strong, but you're just getting all this value on top of it.
So as we progress through this, you can actually see that restriction breeds the creativity. That is what's happening here. I'm forced by my own theme that I've made to follow certain subsets of rules, and then not optimizing those rules. I'm watching power thresholds, I'm watching personas, et cetera, right? And that makes this a real challenge, but it's actually a fun challenge, something I want to take on. So you as a cube curator, when you listen to this, when you're making these choices, you have to be very select on what meets the criteria of your design. I think Alex Nussbaum actually said this quite eloquently recently, is that you're the captain of the ship, right? Your players are going to have a lot of opinions. Maybe they'll look at some of these cards and say, well, this seems powered down, this seems powered up. I'm okay with that. Like, I want some of these cards to represent a high threat level, and I want some of these to represent a utility factor while meeting the requirements. And it's a balance.
It is. And something like Saheeli really does need a deck to be created around it that's going to allow it to shine.
You want to capitalize on this idea.
You do want to capitalize it.
And that's what I want to signal.
It's also a card that can be kind of speed dependent as well.
Right.
Saheeli, when you get her out early, when you've got a bunch of counters and then you've got some burn spells and you've got things to do in your hand that can really capitalize on that static ability, could just go off, right? Top decking Saheeli, when you've got nothing else left in your hand, and maybe the -2 ability isn't very relevant, can kind of lead her to be a bit of a dead card. But how dynamic she can be as a planeswalker, she justifies her existence so comfortably when you've got the support for those archetypes within the cube. And again, not everything is going to be great, right? Not all planeswalkers are designed, as powerful as they can be, not all planeswalkers are designed to be, I enter the game and I win, or I enter the game and I just give you this crazy value. And this is one of the things that I'll give a shout out to the Wizards of the Coast and their design team, is how expansive their design process has been for the planeswalker card type over the years, right? You've got these planeswalkers that come down and just do stuff by themselves, don't need any other supporting pieces, don't even need supporting cards in your hand, and then you've got these pieces that can come in and kind of, build off the archetypes and build off the themes that you have within the rest of your deck or the rest of your cube. And I think Saheeli is a great example of that kind of card that you can include in a cube like this, because she's so thematically on point, but then has that kind of feast or famine almost. I don't know if that's necessarily 100% accurate, but, she can be very feast, she can be very famine, but just fits the cube so well.
This next card, I'm going to have you take away, but what I wanted to say about it is...
I know why you're doing this.
Yeah, it's that educational moment that I see that, from a perspective of a player, they didn't realize that this was a woman. And I find that a lot, right? Like, when I'm looking at these characters, I had somebody a long time ago say to me, like, I didn't know Emrakul was a woman, which is supported, promised ends in here.
Absolutely.
And to me, that's so fascinating because I think it's educational. Like, it gives us a chance. One of the things we talked about during our episode with May and Emma was all about perspective.
Right.
And so this offers what I think players need. It's something you didn't know you wanted, but you always needed, is to learn a little bit more about what they're trying to do here. Would you agree with that?
Yes, because
you and I learned. We learned.
Yeah, it's a habit I've had to break myself out of over the years, and it's something that is not exclusive to Magic. He, him.
Yeah, we always
him. That was everything. I gendered everything, but I didn't just gender everything. I gendered everything to what I was comfortable with when I was 12 years of age or 14 years of age, right? But now I'm 45 years of age.
I'm almost 47.
You're an old man.
We're never going to stop learning, though, right? That's ultimately what it...
Exactly.
The perspective from this cube as we go through these Planeswalkers is this was a learning... It's all about perspective for me.
Yes.
I opened my eyes. People said that I was vulnerable. It's true. I was uncomfortable during that episode, very uncomfortable. But I think that's okay. Like we need to, as a society, learn more, take in more, and become better people.
Yes.
We're not going to do that if we're not uncomfortable.
Right.
So we're doing a very mechanically centric episode here, right? But the reality of it is that these choices are based on the perspective that May provided me as a person, right?
Exactly. And this is obviously an episode that's focused around your Femme Cube, right? Not every cube curator out there is going to be putting together their own Femme Cube, right? Or masculine cube,
right?
Which
I wanted to frighten myself a little bit with something. I wanted the discomfort.
And
discomfort is important.
Yeah, and let's be clear.
How we learn.
Yeah, let's be clear. The masculine cube is
please don't
not
do that.
it's not even remotely. It's not relevant. It's not necessary.
You get my point. Is that this allows us to see a broader idea of the world.
Correct.
This has opened both you and I. This gave us a much broader lens that we need as people. Would you agree with that statement?
I would agree, and I would say
eye-opening.
It has been. Definitely on the back of other life experiences for me.
I would agree.
Over the years of me being on this planet, right? But every learning experience I've learned to really cherish and really appreciate as necessary, not just for my growth as a Magic player or cube enthusiast, but just as a human being. And that's, something that I think is not just a role that we're taking on as, Magic content creators, but also as human beings as well. So very, very important. And I know why you chose Grist.
Mm-hmm.
Because you wanted to choose at least one of the Planeswalkers that I spent an absurd amount of money on back in the day that I've literally never played. Not one single time. The other one being Red and 6. But this, again, going back to how it highlights the art on this card, maybe, does it scream feminine to you?
It's androgynous.
Absolutely. You could see it like that. But this is something that you need to use to challenge the players and challenge the state of mind and challenge what the cube is about.
Yeah. So it really just kind of brought that forward. And so Grist is a known quantity.
Yes.
Still run at my power cube.
You should.
I wanted threats in here.
Insanely
powerful. We kind of talked about it. If you're going strictly mechanical, strictly just power level, this is the density of Planeswalkers in rock. We've talked about this. Green Golgari. It does what you want.
It has all the strongest cards in the cube.
But from a mechanical standpoint, removing all the attributes of the personas and all that, I wanted stuff that kind of gave green and black an identity, and even Gruul, Jund, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of plays in that Jund aspect, does everything you want. I will include this in the show notes. Grist is a lengthy card. Stu, you want to take this one on?
No.
What are the Chains of Mephistopheles?
No, Grist is a known entity. I would actually rather talk about the last one that we're going to talk about on the Golgari side of things, which is Vraska, Golgari Queen, 2 colors, black, green. +2, sacrifice another permanent if you do gain a life and draw a card. -3, destroy target non-land permanent with CMC 3 or less. And then -9, you get an emblem with whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game. 4 loyalty. This is a pretty insane piece. This is one of those Planeswalkers that is just screams value to me. You may sacrifice a permanent if you do gain a life and draw a card.
Abrupt decay.
And then it has abrupt decay and Phyrexian. Exactly.
Ultimately, if we're doing just distilling this down, it played a role because we looked at a lot of Vraskas. We talked about the Phyrexian one before and all that. Yeah. And again, power bands do matter. I can't run Nissa that shakes the world. I can't run a lot of these Phyrexian Planeswalkers. Mm-hmm. They're too good.
They're too good. They're far too good.
They divert the river.
They do.
They're active.
They're I win buttons.
Active fogs, I win. I wanted ones that are kind of in that power band between, we'll say, B+. That's kind of where we're sitting if we're ultimately trying to decipher this down?
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. I think what I love about Vraska is, again, these value pieces that have powerful individual abilities. The +2 to be able to, draw a card and gain a life, that's pretty strong.
Yeah, to sacrifice something,
and she comes
in, may hurt a little bit.
It may,
but it doesn't, because Aristocrat's
doesn't.
Blood Artist is printed as a woman.
I will honestly say this. I've never really struggled to sacrifice another permanent to draw a card.
It's not as bad as you think.
And gain a life.
Yeah.
And the -3 Abrupt Decay is just... It's great.
Chef's kiss.
It's just chef's kiss.
Beautiful.
Exactly. It is. Another beautifully just elegant design on a Planeswalker like this. But also, it comes in as a 4. It's a +2. Not a +1. It's a +2. So those loyalty counters can get out of control very quickly.
Yep.
That -9, that's not to be messed with.
It actually has a relevant threat here with the ultimate. Would you agree? It's not hard to chase.
It's basically comes in. So it comes in. First turn, you tick it up to +6.
Yep.
Right? So now you only need 2 more activations to get it up to 10 loyalty.
Yep.
So now anytime after that, I could -9 this, and I win the game if I have one single creature that deals combat damage. Just one.
Yeah.
So now, think about the conundrum that your opponent is in. Right? They have to keep at least one creature on the battlefield. Heaven forbid you flash something in. Heaven forbid you have something that has haste. Heaven forbid you have one creature, they have 1 or 2 creatures, and you're able to chain together a couple of removal spells.
Or
something
menace.
like that. Or,
Spider?
Saying.
Yeah, rock might be good.
Yep. Harbinger.
Next one we have is Nahiri the Harbinger. Can't say that word. Kind of hard to say. But for 2 colors and for Boros, this is my only Boros. Going back to what the argument that we had before, when Stu was going on Scryfall, I am, by restriction, not able to add additional cards. So, Wizards, please print me more women that are in Boros, but also don't break my power bands, right?
And Rakdos.
And Rakdos.
Please.
Because right now, the Rock has really got locked down.
Yes.
Golgari is doing the business.
That's exactly.
Yeah, so you get Nahiri. So Nahiri's in here. If I had to lean into it, it's got a looter effect that I really like a lot. Yeah, it's actually a rummaging effect, if I had to call it that.
Sure.
And then the second one is -2, exile target enchantment, tapped artifact, or tapped creature. So by now, you've either gotten hit, but mostly from a curator perspective, I wanted this to be like a really stretchy naturalize that also did the persona that I wanted it to do.
Yeah,
it's a powerful card, but
it is. It is. What I love about Nahiri is that the exiling is incredibly relevant in a cube where you're probably going to win by turning creatures sideways, right? And especially in a cube where your white is potentially adjacent to that control side, right? White has its aggro side and its control side. Red has its aggro side as well. So now you've got something that kind of links the two together, right? I love my Jeskai decks. I really, really love playing Jeskai decks. So a Planeswalker that gets to come in, especially, again, it's 4 loyalty. I can discard and draw a card if I'm ahead. Perfect. Now I've got a 6 loyalty Planeswalker that's difficult to deal with. I've got this -2 ability that allows me to deal with a threat or deal with a utility piece.
I'm going to add an argument to the threat, though. I do run Blink in here, leaning back into the Peasant.
Yeah.
It does a lot of resets. Mm-hmm. It's not overly supported, but it is relevant. So if you're at CubeCon 2024, do know that the tap creature thing can become not as relevant as, say, the artifact and enchantment. Mostly I want to hear for the utility aspect, if I'm being completely honest. But it still plays a role. Nahiri's a wonderful character, a persona that I want to latch on to, but I need more Planeswalkers that I can kind of diversify this idea into other color spectrums.
I would agree, and I feel like as a player, this really does, it gives me a direction, right, in some ways, because if I'm playing a red-white deck, or if I'm playing a deck that has red and white in it, and who knows, they might be the lesser colors, right? I might have one dominant color that's not either of those colors, and then, a little bit of red, a little bit of white splash. This is just something that is so utility driven because it allows me to sculpt my hand. It allows me to deal with a permanent that I just, for 4 mana and then -2, I get to exile something. Yes, it has a condition. The creature has to be tapped. The artifact has to be tapped, or it's an enchantment, right? But it's just something that is, it's a little bit of a mind games piece as well. And I think in those kind of colors, that can be something that's very fun as well.
Agree.
But I think Nahiri's just, again, Nahiri is a great character in the lore of Magic. The card is super fun. a lot. Again, very elegant and well-designed Magic card.
And we had a couple on here that are in the show notes that have been since removed. One of the major updates that I have done to the Femme Cube is I removed all modal double face cards.
Correct.
Period. Just cut them out. Just wanted to,
MDFC cards are kind of another like polarizing.
I love them
type, right?
But I didn't want to embrace them in this cube, and I think that's another choice that I've made going forward. And it made me cut a lot of cards that I actually thought were great, and I let them go.
So the two that Anthony's talking about, the MDFC, are Liliana Heretical Healer, who becomes Liliana Defiant Necromancer, and also Nissa Vastwood Seer, who becomes Nissa Sage Animist. I get it. I get it from the player's perspective. I get the disdain that people have about the MDFC. I get that I don't want to flip cards. I get that I don't want to turn things around in the sleeve and then I've forgotten about it when
ultimately,
I come to
wear and tear.
And the wear and tear.
That's what happened.
I get it, but I'm going to say, suck it up. I honestly will say that you sometimes a card is just, it really fits well with the cube. I think Nissa is another really iconic character within the Magic lore, especially recently, where I think as far as not just the story, but I think Nissa has just come into the forefront a little bit more recently. But I think that those two cards are worthy of inclusion. And honestly, I think that if I'm a curator, maybe you're just more seasoned at this than I am, and you've learned how and when to appreciate and not bow to the will or demands of your players, but maybe accommodate their wishes. But for me, for something like that, I'm saying, no, these cards just fit the cube real well, and I'm keeping them. And yeah, okay, I'm going to have to, replace a couple of sleeves a bit more often than I would like to, but they just fit the card. They just fit the cube well. As
I cut all these, the modal cards that we're talking about, it was Shielder that went out. It was Delina the Wild Mage because it made you roll dice. It was Voldaren Bloodcaster that also flipped over. It was Henrika Dolmathari. I think I said that right.
Henrika Dolmathari.
They were okay.
Man, so
I cut
cool.
all the pathways. I just went through and just gutted it all. I wanted to not flip over the cards, referencing our good friend Sam.
All right, the lands I can understand. The lands I'll give you.
Yeah, I wanted something a little bit more. I wanted the top face of the cards to be relevant.
I think you've got better options with lands. I'm always going to say it's just not even necessary anymore. The MDFC lands, I think they're commander cards at best. No disrespect to people who play those in their cube or in their commander decks. I really don't like cards like that. I don't like them as fixing. I don't like them as you have to make the choice between one or the other. Honestly, I think I'd rather play a Guildgate at that point, because even though it comes into play tapped, I at least get that permanent choice of being able to tap for two colors. I don't know. I just don't like those cards. But I think the other MDFC cards, I honestly, I include them. I'm never going to complain. You don't hear me say that very often, because I complain a lot. I am the person that complains the most in our group, aren't I?
So what I actually wanted to pull from this episode was finding the fun and the balance of the power bands within the Planeswalkers, right? So I'm fitting the theme, the personas. I wanted people to sit down and realize something, as we talked about, a character that they wanted to be. I wanted people to be seen. That's what the learning experience was for both you and I.
And maybe
that's to be seen.
Yeah, and maybe that's not something that, this is a very specific kind of cube, right? And maybe a fairly unique cube thematically, right? You're doing the Femme Cube, right? You're representing women, females, magic.
Right.
That doesn't have to be the case for another cube that's out there. You could just be wanting that representation for whatever reason, because of your playgroup, because of your family, for whatever reason. The power level, how they fit into the cube, that is going to apply for any card. It could apply for planeswalkers, enchantments, artifacts, any kind of, any single card that exists within your cube. You're going to want to find a place for it within the archetype or within the, whatever the case may be. This is something that's a little more complex, I think, in this cube. And that's why I think that the way that you talk about this, Anthony, is wonderful because of how complex it is. But the decisions are no less complicated just because the cube identity is less complicated in someone else's cube than it is in the Femme Cube, right? You've still got to balance everything so carefully. Maybe Planeswalkers are just such a great example because they do have that taking over the game kind of ability. But I think you can apply this logic to any card that's in your cube.
And so with that, because I have nothing else to add better than that, frankly.
Yay!
We're going to move over to our social. We're going to start out with thanking our Planeswalkers.
Thanking our Planeswalkers. I love that, Anthony. I love that.
Thanking our Patreons.
No, thanking our Planeswalkers.
Patreons.
That fits so beautifully. So to Brian, to Keaton, to Lord Justice, to Chris Singer, to Nick Lapointe, to Preston, to Sam McKenna, a huge thank you to all of you guys for your ongoing support. Again, to everyone that supported the channel, whether or not you're a Patreon or you're a listener, it really does go a long way just to give us a bit of validation to continue doing what we're doing. But also, maybe one day that microphone stand will become a reality for me. You never know. But again, a huge thank you to you guys. It really does mean a lot to us. If you want to keep this conversation going, go check out the MTG Facebook drafting page at facebook.com/groups/MTGCube, where our resident, Mr. Anthony Adams, administrator,
about to exceed 900 members, by the way.
Woo! That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people.
As always, if you have enjoyed this episode, if you've enjoyed any of our episodes, we would truly appreciate. Give us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. Really goes a long way to getting us out there in the community. You can also use our ultasleeves.com/UberCube affiliate link. Get 5% off your purchase. Also, inkedgaming.com/UberCube. Go check them out. Get a little, get a little bling for your cube, or all right, for your commander deck, or your Dan deck, or Canlander.
Canlander. We don't talk about Canlanders.
Talk about that. But go check them out. Playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, all kinds of custom products, and large volume available. As always, if you want to reach out to us via Twitter, we are at UberCubeMTGPod. Or if you've got a longer question or comment about this episode or any other, you can find us via email at UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. We have our links to the socials as well as our Discord and our Patreon.com/UberCube in the socials. We do appreciate, and the conversation just keeps going back. I got some catching up to do. I'm just going to put that out there right now. I've been away for like 2 weeks. I've been looking at crabs and whatever. I don't know what other people look at on when they're at the beach, but I look at cool crabs and seaweed and all that kind of stuff. Ghost crabs. Actually, lot of
shark's teeth. Did you get any shark's teeth?
No, I didn't find any shark's teeth this time
Ghost
around.
crabs and shark teeth.
No. Yep. What I'm looking at is I look at shells because that's what makes my kids happy.
Yeah. Make necklaces.
Make necklaces, exactly. All right, and with that madness, we're going to do what we always do here and say, Happy Cubing!